I stayed after class for extra help, but somewhere between the questions I asked and the answers he gave, he became the lesson I couldn't walk away from. At first, it was simple, routine even. Students linger after lectures all the time, especially when deadlines breathe down their necks and assignments feel heavier than they should. But with him, the room always felt different. He carried a presence that made the air shift, as if everything slowed just enough for me to notice details I had never cared about before. The calm way he capped his marker, the focus in his eyes when he explained a concept, the way he listened, really listened when I spoke. Maybe that's why I found myself staying later each day. Not because I was confused, but because I didn't want to lose the quiet moments where the world outside the classroom blurred away. He had a way of making learning feel personal, not because he overstepped, but because he genuinely cared about the ideas he taught and the people he taught them to. There was no pressure, no expectation, just a connection built in small pieces, almost accidental. Some days, he would challenge me with questions that made me rethink everything I believed. Other days, he would ask how my week was going, and his voice carried a softness that felt too kind for someone who intimidated an entire lecture hall. It was in those small pauses, those gentle, almost unnoticeable moments, that something began to shift inside me. He remained my professor, professional and respectful to a fault, never crossing lines, never inviting anything inappropriate. But chemistry doesn't always announce itself with sparks. Sometimes it's a quiet hum under your skin, a whisper telling you that the conversation you're having matters more than it should. That the person across from you sees the parts of you no one else slows down long enough to notice. And I felt seen. The classroom, once just rows of chairs and bright lights, slowly became a space I associated with possibility. I would walk in expecting a lesson about theory or literature or whatever the syllabus. He became the reminder that growth can come from unexpected places, and that some people enter your life not to stay forever, but to teach you something unforgettable. And he did. He became a lesson I couldn't walk away from. Every time he said class dismissed, my heart whispered stay. It wasn't something I admitted to anyone, not even to myself at first. It started as a feeling too subtle to name, an inexplicable hesitation when everyone else packed up their bags and rushed toward the door. But while they hurried out, I found myself moving slower, pretending to organize my notes or double-checking my laptop, giving myself excuses to linger just a little longer. Maybe it was the way his voice changed after the lecture ended. In front of the full class, he carried authority, steady, composed, firm. But when only a few students remained, that authority softened into something warm, something human. And when the room finally emptied, when it was just the two of us surrounded by quiet, his voice dropped into a tone that felt personal, intentional, like he wasn't just speaking to a student, he was speaking to me. I didn't stay because I needed help. I stayed because he made learning feel. Some days he'd ask, "Any questions?" And I'd answer one, then another, less because I was confused and more because I wanted the conversation to stretch just a little further. He always answered with patience, with curiosity, with a spark in his eyes that said he enjoyed these moments too, even if he would never say it. Other days, I'd catch him glancing at the door after everyone left, as if checking whether I would stay. And when I did, something unspoken settled between us. Respectful, careful, but undeniably there. He inspired me in ways I couldn't explain, because when he spoke about the subject he loved, he made passion look like purpose. He made knowledge feel like something worth chasing. And somewhere along the way, I realized it wasn't just the subject I was drawn to, it was the person who breathed life into it. Still, he remained the professional, the mentor, the steady guide. He never blurred lines, never encouraged anything inappropriate. But that didn't stop my heart from reacting each time he smiled at something I said, each time his eyes softened, each time the room felt too small for the tension quietly pulsing between us. Class dismissed, he'd say, and every time, without fail, the world would expect me to walk away. But my heart, persistent, hopeful, foolish, always whispered the same thing. Expanded keynote, 500 words, He was my professor, but the real problem was how easily he read me. Not in the dramatic, soul-piercing way books describe, but in the subtle, disarming way that left me feeling seen when I least expected it. It wasn't that he crossed lines or made bold assumptions. He simply noticed things most people never did. Things I didn't think anyone could notice. He could tell when I was overwhelmed, even on days when I tried to hide it behind perfect posture and forced confidence. He saw the tension in my shoulders before I even acknowledged it. He recognized the slight hesitation in my voice when I asked a question, the way my pen paused mid-sentence when I doubted an answer. It was uncanny, like he could read the shifts in my mood with the same ease he read the lines of a textbook. And it wasn't because he was looking too closely. It was because he listened, really listened. In a world where most people waited for their turn to speak, he paid attention in a way that felt rare, almost otherworldly. He'd say things like, "You're thinking about this differently today. What changed?" Or, "You understood that, but something else is bothering you, isn't it?" Simple, innocent observations. Perfectly professional, yet somehow sharper than anything I was used to. At first, it unsettled me. I wasn't used to someone catching the tiny tremors beneath the surface. It made me feel exposed, not in a reckless or inappropriate way, but in a way that made me aware of how much I kept hidden from the world. With him, I couldn't hide behind silence or half-smiles. He saw right through those. And the strange part? I didn't mind. There was a comfort in being understood without explaining myself. He never pushed, never interrogated, never stepped into territory he shouldn't. He simply saw what was there and left space for me to either talk about it or let it go. That kind of understanding can feel dangerous, not because of the person offering it, but because of what it awakens in you. He taught with passion, the kind that pulled you in even when your mind was elsewhere. And somehow, he always knew when my mind was elsewhere. He'd raise an eyebrow, give me a patient half-smile, and guide me back to the moment without making me feel embarrassed. His awareness wasn't invasive, it was grounding. Over time, I found myself anticipating those moments. The way he'd tilt his head slightly when he was analyzing an idea I brought up. The way he'd notice when I was holding back a thought and gently draw it out of me. The way he made me feel like my mind was something worth exploring. He never crossed a line. He never blurred roles. He never encouraged anything beyond professionalism. But his insight, his ability to read me with such ease, left a mark I couldn't ignore. Because sometimes the most powerful connection isn't built on touch or words. Sometimes it's built on being seen. And he saw me more clearly than anyone ever had. I came for answers. He became a question I couldn't stop asking. It wasn't supposed to be complicated. I walked into his class expecting information, structure, clarity. The usual things you get from a professor who's known for being brilliant, demanding, and impossible to impress. I didn't walk in expecting to feel anything. Certainly not the kind of curiosity that keeps you awake at night, replaying conversations you shouldn't be thinking about. He had a way of turning simple ideas into something alive. When he spoke, he didn't just explain concepts. He pulled them apart, examined them, breathed meaning into them. It was impossible not to be drawn in. I had always liked learning, but with him, it felt different. It felt personal, like he wasn't teaching a subject. He was teaching me how to think. The more questions I asked, the more he challenged me. He would tilt his head slightly, eyes narrowing in thoughtful focus, as if he was trying to see the shape of my mind. It was unsettling at first, having someone take my ideas seriously enough to dissect them. But it was also intoxicating. It made me want to show him more. Think deeper. Be sharper. Somewhere along the line, the questions I asked stopped being just about the material. I started wondering about him, how he learned to speak with such conviction, what shaped his calm, how he always seemed to say exactly what I needed to hear without ever stepping outside professional boundaries. He never blurred the line. Not once. But curiosity doesn't follow rules. I found myself watching him more closely than I should have, studying the way he paced when he was thinking, how his expressions softened when a student finally understood something, the way he listened with his whole attention. He never did anything inappropriate, never gave me a reason to think there was something more, but the connection I felt was undeniable. Some days, I try to convince myself it was just admiration, respect, a natural response to a brilliant teacher. But then there were moments, small ones, fleeting, that made everything feel too big to explain away. The way his voice lowered when he answered one of my tougher questions. The way he remembered details I mentioned weeks earlier. The way his gaze lingered a second longer than necessary when he sensed I wasn't saying everything on my mind. I came for answers, academic ones, logical ones, but he made me question things I had never dared to consider before about my ambitions, my fears, my potential, and myself. He leaned closer to explain the lesson, but somehow I became the one learning about him. It happened gradually, the way most unexpected moments do. One day, I was simply another face in his class, scribbling notes while trying to keep up with his fast-paced explanations. The next day, everything felt different, sharper, slower, more aware. Maybe it was the way his voice softened when he realized I was struggling. Or maybe it was the way he shifted the textbook toward me, as if guiding me not just through the material, but through something bigger. He always kept a respectful distance, never crossing a line, never acting inappropriately. But the way he taught, it had a kind of presence to it, a quiet gravity. When he leaned over my desk to walk me through a complex idea, it was the clarity in his voice, not the closeness, that startled me. He explained things with patience, with intention, with a level of attention I wasn't used to receiving. Most professors teach the syllabus. He taught the student. I found myself learning more about him in those moments than I expected. Not because he shared anything personal, he never did, but because of his subtle details that revealed themselves in the way he worked. The faint crease between his brows when he concentrated. The calm steadiness in his tone when he sensed I was frustrated. The quiet passion in his eyes when a difficult idea finally clicked for me. He had a way of making the world fall away when he spoke, like nothing else mattered except the idea we were trying to understand. And somewhere between the lectures, the questions, the explanations, I realized I wasn't just learning the subject. I was learning him. I learned he cared deeply about his students, not in a boundary-crossing way, but in the way good teachers do. He noticed effort. He appreciated curiosity. He respected honesty. He never judged mistakes. He used them as stepping stones. And when he leaned closer to point something out, his voice carried an encouragement that felt rare in a world so full of criticism. The more I learned about him, the more I learned about myself, about the way I responded to challenges, about the parts of me that woke up under his attention, about the corners of my mind that only felt brave when he pushed them. He made me think, not just academically, but emotionally. Why did his presence feel different? Why did his guidance feel personal, even though he never stepped outside his role? Why did I replay his explanations in my head long after class ended? He was my professor, distant enough to be safe, close enough to leave an impression. And as much as his lessons shaped my understanding of the subject, it was the unspoken parts of him that shaped something deeper. He leaned closer to explain the material, but I was the one discovering something unexpected. Not about the topic, not about the assignment, about him, and about the way learning can sometimes feel like something more. He taught the subject, but somehow, he also taught me how to find myself again. When I enrolled in his class, I wasn't looking for anything more than credits. My life felt like it had been drifting in circles, assignments, deadlines, obligations, expectations. Everything I did felt mechanical, as if I was going through motions instead of living them. I had lost a part of myself along the way and didn't even realize how far I'd wandered off course. Then I met him. He didn't try to inspire anyone. That was the strange part. He walked into class with quiet confidence, a stack of papers under his arm, and a mind so sharp it made the air feel electric. His lectures weren't just lessons. They were invitations to think, to question, to wonder. He challenged us in ways that irritated some students and awakened others. I didn't know which group I belonged to. Not at first, but somewhere between his explanations, his encouragement, and the way he made complex ideas feel alive, something inside me stirred. A spark I hadn't felt in a long time. A reminder that learning could be more than pressure, It could be possibility. He never made things easy. Not once. He pushed us, not harshly, but deliberately. He demanded effort, curiosity, honesty. And whenever I started slipping into old patterns of self-doubt, he noticed. Not because he crossed any line, but because good teachers see what most people overlook. One afternoon, after class, he paused before erasing the board and looked at me with thoughtful calm. "You understand the material," he said. "What you're struggling with isn't the content. It's trusting your own thinking." He said it so simply, so matter-of-fact, that it hit me harder than any lecture ever had. He wasn't just teaching the topic. He was teaching confidence, resilience, identity. He was teaching me how to recognize the value of my own voice. Week by week, something began to shift. I started raising my hand more, not because I was certain, but because he made uncertainty feel safe, like part of the process, not something to fear. My assignments improved, but more importantly, I improved. I began taking risks, academically and personally. I stopped apologizing for not knowing everything. I started appreciating the journey instead of obsessing over perfection. He didn't know he was doing any of this. He didn't give motivational speeches or dramatic advice. He simply believed in growth, quietly, consistently, and without asking for credit. And in that belief, I found pieces of myself I thought I had lost forever. The truth is, he never tried to change me. He just taught with a passion that reminded me life could be bigger than the boxes I'd trapped myself in. He showed me how to think, not just on paper, but about who I was becoming. He taught the subject, but his lessons reached deeper than any textbook ever could. And in learning from him, I ended up rediscovering me. He challenged my mind and unknowingly awakened parts of me I thought were gone. Before his class, I had been coasting through the semester, doing the work, meeting deadlines, showing up, but never really present. My spark had dulled somewhere between stress, responsibility, and the quiet exhaustion that comes from trying to be everything for everyone. I wasn't failing, but I wasn't growing either. I was simply existing. Then came his course, one I hadn't expected to care about, let alone carry with me the way I did. From the first lecture, it was clear he was different. He didn't speak to impress. He spoke to provoke thought, to disrupt comfort, to make us sit up, challenge assumptions, and, not so gently, question everything we believed about the subject and ourselves. He didn't want memorized answers. He wanted understanding, depth, curiosity. And for the first time in a long time, my mind felt hungry again. He asked questions no one had prepared for, not because they were tricky, but because they required honesty. He didn't care if the answer was perfect. He cared if it was real, authentic, mine. Sometimes he'd pause mid-lecture, glance at me, and say, "You're thinking something. What is it?" Not in a personal way, not in a boundary-crossing way, in a "you have a mind worth hearing" way. And every time he asked, something inside me unlocked a little more. I began to look forward to the challenge, the way he pushed me to articulate ideas I was afraid to voice, the way he encouraged complexity instead of punishing it, the way he made me feel like my thoughts held weight, even when I wasn't sure of them myself. Little by little, the parts of me that had gone quiet, ambition, curiosity, confidence, began to stir again. He didn't know he was doing it. He wasn't trying to inspire me or change me. He was simply teaching with passion, precision, and a kind of intellectual grace that made everyone around him want to rise to his level. But for me, the impact felt personal, transformational, unexpected. He made me think deeper, question harder, reach farther, not for him, but for myself. Some days, his challenges frustrated me, forcing me out of the safety of easy answers. Other days, they electrified me, making me realize how much I'd been holding back, how afraid I had been of my own potential. But every day, his class chipped away at the walls I had built around my mind. And in that process, something beautiful happened. I came back to myself. The version of me that used to love learning. The version of me that wasn't afraid to speak up. The version of me that believed her thoughts mattered. He didn't awaken these parts with compliments or personal attention. He awakened them through challenge, through pushing, questioning, demanding that I see myself as capable again. He challenged my mind.